My name is Clara Josephine Merritt, born Clara Josephine Holt, on the 2nd day of August in the year 1840 in Greene County, Tennessee. I am 78 years old. I have outlived a husband, 2 children, 3 sisters, and more neighbors than I care to count. I have been asked many times how I managed to remain standing through all of it, and I always give the same answer. You do not manage it. You simply do not stop. But there is one night I have never spoken of in full. Not to my children. Not to the women at church who believed they knew my story. Not even to myself, not with full honesty, until now. The night my husband Thomas did not come home, I waited by the window until the lamp burned down. He had been dead in a ditch along the Greenville Road for 6 hours before anyone found him. And my first feeling, before the grief, before the fear, before any of the things a wife is supposed to feel, was anger. I was angry at him. That is the thing I have never said aloud until this moment. But to understand why a woman would feel anger before grief, you must first understand the life we were living. Thomas Merritt and I were married in the spring of 1860, in the same Greene County church where my parents had married before us. I was 19 years old. Thomas was 24, lean and deliberate with his words, a man who kept his promises in small ways and his doubts in long silences. He had 114 acres in the eastern part of the county, more timber than cropland, but workable ground along the creek bottom, where the soil ran dark and gave back what you put into it. We were not wealthy. We were settled. There is a difference that matters. I knew Thomas Merritt was not a man of great warmth the day I married him. I knew it, and I did not consider it a fault. In that time and that place, warmth was not the currency of a marriage. Steadiness was. Competence was. Thomas had both in full measure. He was up before light without being asked. He did not drink to excess. He did not raise his voice or his hand to anyone weaker than himself. By every measure that county applied to a man, Thomas Merritt was a good one. We had our first child in the spring of 1861, a girl, Nora. The war was already pulling at men from every direction by then. Thomas did not enlist in the first months. He had the farm to consider, a new baby, a young wife, and he was not the kind of man who moved toward anything quickly without thinking it all the way through. I was grateful for this. I have since wondered whether I should have told him so more plainly at the time. I did not. I assumed he knew. I assumed there was time for saying things. By 63, the war had settled into the county like weather that will not change. Thomas was quiet about it in the way he was quiet about most things. He still rose before light. He still worked the creek bottom until his shoulders gave out each evening. But something had come into his eyes during those years, a distance, the way a man looks when he is deciding something he has not yet decided. I saw it. I did not ask about it. I told myself it was the war pressing on everyone equally. I told myself he would speak when he was ready. He had never been a man who spoke before he was ready. In the October of 1863, Thomas rode to Greenville on a Thursday afternoon. He had done it 100 times before. 6 miles to town, business at the dry goods merchant, back before supper. He owed a payment on a piece of equipment. He had $4 in his coat pocket that I had counted out myself that same morning. He told me he would be home before dark. He kissed Nora on the top of her head. He looked at me for a moment in the doorway. Not a long look. The way a man looks when he is leaving and has every expectation of returning. He did not return. I waited by the front window until the first lamp burned out. I lit another. I told myself the roads were poor after 2 days of rain. I told myself his horse had thrown a shoe. I told myself there were 100 ordinary explanations for a man being late on a Thursday in October, and every one of them was plausible, and not a single one of them was what had happened. They found Thomas the following morning in the ditch along the Greenville Road. His horse had come home in the night without him. He had been thrown, or had fallen, or the horse had shied at something in the dark. The doctor said his neck had broken cleanly. He would not have suffered long, the doctor told me. I have never understood why people say that. I suppose there is simply nothing else to say when they are standing in a woman's kitchen with their hat in their hands. I was 23 years old. I had a daughter not yet 3. I had 114 acres of timber country in a county divided by a war that was not finished. And I had $4 in my dead husband's coat pocket that a neighbor returned to me in an envelope 3 days after they buried him, which I then used to settle the debt he had ridden out to pay. The anger came before the grief. I want to say this plainly because I have never heard a woman permitted to say it plainly. My first feeling when they told me was not sorrow, it was fury. Not at God, not at the road, not at the horse that came home without him, at Thomas. For riding out on a wet Thursday afternoon as though the world were entirely safe and ordinary and without consequence. For leaving without saying anything that mattered in that doorway, for looking at me in that brief, ordinary way as if there were 1,000 more ordinary mornings still ahead of both of us. I was angry. Then I was ashamed of the anger. Then I folded both away somewhere very deep and did not look at them for a long time. I kept the farm. I say this plainly because people always shorten their understanding of what that means when they hear it. I kept 114 acres through the rest of the war, with Nora on my hip and a neighbor 2 miles east who worked the heavy ground in exchange for a portion of the corn. I kept it through 2 poor harvests and 1 flooding spring that took the first planting entirely, and a cattle illness in '67 that killed 4 of my 6 animals in a single week. I kept it because the alternative was to let it go, and I was not willing to let go of one more thing. I was asked twice to remarry. Both men were decent and honest and had no cause to be refused. I refused them both. People assumed this was loyalty to Thomas. I allowed them to believe it because the truth was harder to explain, and I have never been a woman who spent words on things people were not ready to hear. The truth was that I had not finished being angry. I could not give my name to another man while I was still angry at the last one. That may sound like a small distinction. It was not small to me. There are things Thomas and I never said to one another. Things that had proper weight and were never given it because we both lived inside the assumption that the morning would always arrive again. I did not tell him I was grateful for his steadiness. He did not tell me whatever it was he held behind that distance in his eyes during those war years. We moved through our days like two people who intended to speak at length and kept deferring it until it was convenient. And then the convenience never came, and there we both were. The anger left me somewhere in my 40s, quietly, without ceremony, the way it had first arrived. What replaced it was not peace precisely, not forgiveness, because there was nothing requiring forgiveness. Something closer to acknowledgement. He did not know it was the last morning. I did not know either. That is not a comfort. But it is the truth, and the truth is the only thing I have left to offer you. I am 78 years old. Thomas has been in that ground for 55 years. I have lived more than twice as long without him as I lived with him. And still, on certain October mornings when the road is wet and the light comes gray through the eastern timber, I think of that doorway, that ordinary, unremarkable look before he turned his horse south. Do not leave a doorway in the ordinary way if you have any other choice. Say the thing. It does not need to be large or eloquent. It only needs to be said. The road is longer than you think, and it bends when you are not expecting it to bend, and some mornings do not come back. That is the only thing I know with certainty. That is everything.